Hi everyone, welcome to my Unity3D Playmaker FPS tutorial. That was a mouthful. Alrighty, and I'm going to show you how to create your own first-person game. Very simple, it's probably going to be around 3 parts, but I'm going to try and get as much done in this first tutorial as I can. Alrighty, let's get started and create a 3D object, and let's create a plane. Don't know what happened, I think I clicked the wrong one. Let's create a plane. Perfect. Now we're onto it. Let's zero everything out. And let's just scale it up a little bit. And let's just create a new folder. And we're going to create a material folder. And let's create a material. I'm going to call this ground. Drag the ground onto the ground. And we're going to change the name to ground. And we're going to change the ground's texture to a not very ground thing. We're just going to choose this one, and we're going to create a tile around 10. Now, we're going to create a capsule, and this is going to be our little player object, our stand-in player for the time being. Let's just scale them up a little bit. Let's just move the ground a little bit bigger as well. Alrighty, I'm going to change his name to player, and I'm going to create a character controller. Alrighty. So now if we right mouse click on this guy, create an empty. This is basically just an empty vector position. And we're going to create and call it, what are we going to call it? Position camera here. So we're going to position the camera here. And we're going to kind of drag it up because this is going to be facing forward. So we're going to kind of want to have his head, the camera here, to kind of make it look like he's running that way. Alrighty. Now we're going to right mouse click on nothing and create one called player system. This is where we're going to put every object of the player inside here, and we're going to drag the player into the player system. So now when we drag the player system, we drag that. Although let's just quickly drag the player and make sure that you have the position all zeroed out of the player system, and also zero out the position of the player, just so it all kind of works a bit better. There you go. Perfect. That looks good. Let's just double check that's all good. Yep. Alrighty. Now let's grab a camera. This is going to be our FPS camera. To quickly rename it as well, just so you can follow. When I click on it, you can press F2, and that's just a quick shortcut to rename your objects. Alright, I'm going to create another empty object and call this camera base. And we're going to drag the FPS camera into the camera base, and we're going to drag the camera base into the player system. So, player system, you've got the player, and then you've got the camera base. It's all going to make sense in a little bit. And drag the camera base, not the camera base. Oh, let's just reset the things. I want to drag the red area up here. So now it's kind of roughly in that same area that the camera position here is. Alrighty, and now you want to just quickly save your scene. I'm going to call it scenes, and I'm going to call it tutorial 1. And now that's appeared in here. That's our little save scene. Lovely. Alrighty, now you want to make sure that you've imported your Playmaker from the asset store. And now I have my folder in here. Perfect. Okay. So now let's get some scripting underway. So we're going to want to make our camera base follow the camera here position. So when we're moving our player around, the camera moves with it. And there's going to be a reason for this. So let's get our camera base, create an FSM, a finite state machine, it is called, and we're going to call follow position. Perfect. I'm going to make a move towards, and we'll close the actions, and we're going to drag our camera position here into the target object, and our game object is the owner. That's what we're going to move towards. We're going to move the owner towards the target object. We're going to make a speed of roughly around 25, and we don't want it to ever finish, so make that 0. Righty. So now that is basically that. I'm just going to quickly rename the state and just say follow the camera here pause. Very good. Now let's get some movement happening on our character, and we call this FPS underscore movement. The names of these really don't matter at all. This is just for your own reference. You can even type a full description. We will make our character move here. This is just for your reference. Alrighty, and it also appears up here, which is kind of handy if you have lots of people working on it. Alrighty, so we're just going to create a movement state. Actually, no, we're going to create set player state, and we're going to just create a quick transition. Transitions are what help you from transitioning between states and different events, but we'll get to that later because right now we don't really need that. And we want to set a variable. A variable can be anything. It can be a point, it can be a number, it can be a float, it can be a yes or a no, that's a bool, or it can be a game object. And we want to set a player, so we're going to set a game object and we're going to call it the player object. Put it in inspector. If you click inspector, it actually shows you while you're playing the game. This will populate with what object is selected. Alrighty, so we want to drag, go back to our state view, click our action and say set game object, and we want to click the variable for player object because that's what we're going to set, and we're going to set that game object as our player. We're going to drag that in there, and now we have set the player object as the player object. So basically, if we set up any other FSMs throughout our whole system, we can say find what our player object is from this state, and then you won't have to go and select every single time this player object. It's going to be set forever. Alrighty, and now we're going to call this our movement. Alrighty, so we want to get axis vector. Now this basically drives our character motion, and as you can see, we have a vertical and a horizontal, and we're going to use it to the we're gonna map it to the XZ plane because that is basically the floor plane. If you kind of bring up this angle, this is the floor, you've got the X and you've got the Z. And we're gonna have to create a vector for the character movement. So let's go to the vector 3. I'm just gonna call this input vector. Did not spell that right. Input vector. And we're gonna set that as an inspector as well so we can see when it's working. And we're going to want an input magnitude. You don't really need input magnitude for what we're doing because that's mainly just if you're driving a mechanism with animations and stuff. But we'll get into that later. So we'll click that one as well, and we'll just make sure that's on the inspector. And we'll just make sure that's all set. And we will say simple, or control a simple move, and we're going to set the movement to the vector that we are reading. Now, one important thing that you'll want to do is make sure that relative to is relative to the camera. Otherwise, you'll just be walking around anywhere and it won't actually be making sense to the player. So whatever you see, you'll be moving in that relative distance. It's kind of like a complicated math, but just make sure that camera's in there and it should work. Alrighty, and we should be good. So let's just close this out for a second and let's press play. Alrighty, so now when I'm pressing the WSAD, or you can use the arrow keys if you want, and you can see our character is moving around and the camera is moving with him. Now let's make this a bit more dramatic. Let's go back into the Playmaker and grab the player, back to the movement, and let's times the speed by 10. Now you'll notice that looks a bit better, doesn't it? Although, see how I'm moving the mouse? We're not following the mouse around. Aha! So let's come back to the camera, drop down our Playmaker FSM, and let's call this FPS look around, or first person shooter look around. Alrighty, and now let's call this camera, and let's call it look action browser, and we're going to create the mouse look. That's what we want. Mouse look. I'm going to bring down the sensitivity to about 3 because otherwise it's just a bit too crazy. And let's close this out, and now you'll notice if we go in, I'm using the mouse. It's inverted, but we can fix that. And now you can walk around, and wherever you look, you're moving in that relative direction. So we've created a very simple first-person character. Pretty cool, huh? Alright, let's fix up the invert. So if we go up to Edit, Project Settings, Input, and go down to Axes, and let's go to mouse Y, because that's the vertical, and we just want to click Invert, play again, and now everything is working. So now we can walk around. You're seeing the edge of our sphere, and we can fine-tune this by, there's a little trick. If you go back to our scene, see how the camera is kind of sticking in there a bit? Since we're moving our camera base in relation to where this position is, the camera position, let's just move this up and out a little bit. And while it's playing, you can actually click, right mouse click, and say copy component, and this will copy all of the values that you've changed. This, I didn't actually know about this, and it saved me so much time writing down all the numbers and then typing it back in. So then when you press stop, the numbers re-change back to how they were, and now you can just press right mouse, paste component values, and voila, we have our updated position. So now we can press play, we see our shadow, and we're walking around. Now, see, if you look behind, the character is not actually moving, kind of just moving the camera in a relative position, but not the character. How do we fix this? Well, we can go back to the player. Actually, no, what we want to do first is go to our FPS camera. Let's just zoom out and right mouse click on the camera, create an empty, and we're going to say player look at here. So, and then just drag the blue line. You don't want to move either of these other ones because otherwise the player will be offset. And so, and then we'll go back to our player and then to our FPS movement, and we're going to say look at, and as it kind of suggests, we're going to put our player look at here. We're going to say keep vertical because we don't want the player, when you look up, the whole player body to kind of look up. You just want it to keep it on that one axis. You want to make it every frame. Alrighty, and let's click play again. So now you can see we can't actually make the player, we can't see the capsule because we are now looking at it the whole time, which is pretty cool. And I'll try and show you this to you a bit better. So, you know, if I just go back to the player, there's this really handy thing that, see the debug line? You can actually turn this on. I'll just change the color. And then if you go into gizmos, you can click that and make it gray, and that means it's selected. So now you can see wherever this blue line is, this blue line, the character is actually going to look towards it, and as you can see in this top view. So as I'm looking around, the player is looking in that position, and it will follow that position. But if I look up and down, that blue line isn't moving because we got that keep vertical turned on. So I think this will probably do it for the first part of this first-person shooter tutorial system. If you've liked what you see, leave a comment, and if you have any questions, also leave a comment and I'll get back to you. But look out for our next tutorial. We're gonna try and give them a gun, and we'll implement some sort of very simple AI for an enemy. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and if you like this, throw us a like, maybe subscribe, and I will catch you next time.